All right, in this video, I'm going to break down how to choose where you guys should think about living abroad in your coming future. So, this video, I've got 3 regions that are the most common ones for people to digital nomad, expat, date abroad in where you are, maybe in the United States or the West, and how that lines up with the convenience factor. And then go over some of the other things to consider when you're trying to pick out the place to do your scouting trip or maybe do a trial run of living abroad. I also have a 6-step mini series in the description down below you can get for 100% free, which maps out how to begin living abroad as a Christian man and the different steps and things to consider. But anyways, let's dive into the video series here. So I have 3 regions. I have Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. These are the 3 most common areas that people like to expat in. One, because they have a cheap cost of living, traditional women, good culture, and they're generally somewhat easy to get to. That depends on where you live, which is what I have over here. I have West Coast, the South / Central United States, the East Coast, which that could include probably Eastern Canada as well. This could include Western Canada. And then we're going to kind of score it here at the bottom. So let's talk about each of these regions off the bat and see which ones are good for you based on where your location is. A lot of guys don't consider this. Is where you are in the United States right now is greatly going to impact how convenient it is for you to get to your desired location, okay? I understand that maybe you're like, okay, I've got my heart set on this place. I don't care if it takes 3 flight connections and costs $2,000. Okay, that might be fine the first time, but the more you do this, if this becomes a part of your life, the more that's gonna grate on you. The cost every time you go there, the travel time, okay? All that stuff is eventually gonna be more and more burdensome, because you're going to want to go back to the United States. Even if you love it, the country there, you're going to want to go back. You're going to need to go back for paperwork and certain stuff. So it's kind of unavoidable. It's a factor a lot of guys don't consider. So let's talk about if you're in the West Coast, how easy is it for you to travel to Asia? I'm talking about South Korea, Japan, Philippines, these places right here. I'm going to say very, very easy. Okay, let's write that down there. Easy, okay? You can go from the West Coast to East Asia, 10-hour flight. 1 10-hour flight usually doesn't have any connections. It's really simple, really quick. There's a lot of cheap routes. This is a very good one. Philippines, there might be some connection flights. Southeast Asia, there might be some connection flights. But compared to the other regions trying to get there, yours is going to be pretty good. For example, I'm on the West Coast to get to Seoul, South Korea. It takes me about 10 hours. It's 1 flight. It's not that expensive in the off season. Boom, we're done, right? It takes me longer to get to some places in the United States. So that one is pretty good there. Let's talk about Latin America, okay? This one is medium. It depends on where you're going, okay? If you're going to Panama or Mexico, places there, sometimes you can get there in 1 flight. Okay, so it's like medium slash, well, I'm gonna leave it as medium because there's some places that are really hard to get to. So if you're going anywhere still in like the contiguous North America, like Mexico and Panama, Central America, for example, sometimes there's 1 flight or it's a really quick connection. So to get to Mexico, like if you live in California, for example, it might take just 3 or 4 hours, maybe shorter than that to get to Mexico City. To get to Central America, 4 hours, maybe you have a short connection, okay? We're talking about easily in 1 day. But if you're going to places like Colombia, Brazil, places like that, you're gonna need to hit a connection most likely. So it's going to be a 10, 12-hour voyage, very similar to the time in Asia. But if you're going to the southern cone of South America, okay, Argentina, Paraguay, these places, that's going to be 2 connections. That's going to be a really, really long trip. So something to consider there. Overall, depends on where you pick, but it's medium. It's not horrible, but it's not great either, okay? It just really depends on where you're going, your airlines, and your flights, but I would say it's in the medium range. Eastern Europe, hard. This is hard difficulty, okay? This is going to take you forever to get there because you're going to have to fly from the West Coast, probably into New York, probably into a place like Paris or London or Spain, and then fly to Eastern Europe. That's going to be a long and expensive flight. Okay, I calculated out from the West Coast to about someplace like Warsaw, Poland, for example. It's about 20 hours of total flight time with 2 connections in there. Expensive, arduous, inconvenient. So think about that before you want to get into living abroad situation. Think about how difficult it'll be to get there consistently. Now, the South or the Central, okay, for Asia, I would say this is about medium, okay? You're gonna have to connect through LAX probably before heading anywhere in Asia. It's not great. I would say it's medium to bad, okay, for example. It's gonna be much longer than the West Coast. But overall, I think, let's say you lived in Tennessee, for example, you probably go to Nashville, to LAX, and then start to make your voyage to Asia. It depends on where you're going there. But if you're going to South Korea, for example, from Dallas, Texas, you probably go Dallas, LAX, Dallas to Seattle, and then to all the way to Seoul, South Korea. That's a 16, 17-hour voyage. Not really that short, okay? Latin America, easy. I would say more for the South than the Central. But if you live in Texas, Nashville, Florida, any of these places, super quick, super easy to get to Latin America, anywhere in Latin America, basically, except for maybe Paraguay or some places of the Southern Cone, you might need a connection. But to get to Colombia, we're talking 3 hours. To get to Mexico, we're talking a couple hours. Super quick, super easy. People vacation to those spots all the time. That is a really, really convenient choice for you. And then for Eastern Europe, it's going to be medium to hard, okay? There aren't really a lot of direct flights from places like Texas or, well, maybe Georgia, actually. So it depends. Like I said, it depends on where you're at. Overall, Eastern Europe is just more difficult to get to from the United States. But you're going to probably have to connect through one airline, then connect to somewhere in Europe, and then finally get to Eastern Europe. Okay, so it's going to be close to the West Coast voyage, but in some cases be easier. But medium/hard, it's how I'd put that one there. Now let's talk about if you're on the East Coast. Okay, Asia, hard. It's going to take you a long time. Okay, let's say you're in New York. You're going to have to go from New York to LA, Seattle, then to Seoul, South Korea, and then to the Philippines or wherever you're trying to go. Okay, that's probably a 20+ hour voyage. Okay, not for the faint of heart. Not going to be cheap either. Latin America, I would say this one is like easy medium. Okay, this one's also pretty good. There's a lot of direct flights. You guys got New York City. There's a lot of direct flights from New York City to places like Colombia, okay? Places like Mexico. If you're in Florida, that's even easier. Charlotte, North Carolina, Georgia. I would say easy, medium for sure. You got a lot of good options there, very similar to the South and Central. It's basically only the West Coast where traveling to Latin America can be a bit of a voyage. And now for Eastern Europe, I'm saying I'm going to put that one as medium, okay? Now, these are all kind of, it's not easy to get to Eastern Europe, but maybe from New York, there might be some direct flights to Eastern Europe. So I'm going to say medium/easy. Okay, overall, probably the East Coast has the best options for Latin America and Eastern Europe, but really bad for Asia. If you're in the South, it's kind of decent for all the places, I would say. Easiest for Latin America and West Coast, super easy to get to Asia, and then progressively getting harder the more eastward you go. So like I said, you may be a guy on the West Coast. You may think, I'm going to Eastern Europe. I love it there. And maybe it does work out. But like I said, consider the voyage time. Consider the cost of doing that over and over again if you're trying to make it a long-term base. You want to keep those things in mind for sure. So that's the geography of it. These are logistical stuff that people don't think about when they're starting to get into this thing. But I'm telling you guys, it matters. Okay, it matters more than you think. Like I said, you do one vacation or exploratory trip, may not seem like a big deal, but over time, we're trying to establish a base. It might over time. So those was what I would have there. Now let's consider the other things about the various locations, okay? And remote work, and I'll talk about how that one relates to the convenience of these regions. But let's talk about cost of living. In Asia, it varies, but if you're sticking to Philippines, Thailand, Southeast Asia, that region, it's gonna be cheap. Okay, I'm gonna draw just a $1 sign actually, and then I would say East Asia is $2 signs. Okay, East Asia is cheaper than the U.S., but not as cheap as Southeast Asia and a lot of places in Latin America, but higher quality of life and infrastructure. Okay, but Southeast Asia, one of the more affordable ones on this list for sure. Dating in Southeast Asia, I would say is pretty easy. Let's give it out of 10. We're not easy, but pretty friendly, pretty warm. East Asia is going to be more difficult, but with a strategy, not that hard, but probably one of the harder regions. Okay, so I'm giving 8 out of 10, 5 out of 10, because a lot of these places have different regions for sure. Remote work, okay? Bad. Why bad? Because the time zone. The time zone is the biggest struggle, okay? If you're in South Korea or Philippines, or you start to go even more further to Thailand, you're talking about 12, 13, 14-hour time differences. Unless you have a job where the time doesn't matter and you can do your own thing on your own time, if you're in sales or anything that involves working with other people or setting up meetings with clients, this is really super inconvenient. Okay, so believe me, I've lived there. The time zone difference, it seems cool at first, and then it gets really grating and sucky over time. So consider that before you decide to make that your long-term base. Now, maybe this doesn't matter to you. You have money, your job doesn't focus on that, whatever. You have a plan, that's fine. But if you are going to have to work remote and actually talk to people, it's a bit of a struggle. And keeping tabs on family members and friends and be able to communicate with them, it's harder when you're not in the same time zone. Okay. Now let's talk about Latin America. Overall, Latin America is pretty affordable. Okay. You'll have to go to places like Argentina and Chile can be more expensive in some places, but overall, if you're smart, I would say Latin America is a really good, draw better dollar sign, really solid for cost of living. Okay. You can live in or near pretty big urban centers for pretty cheap. You can live like king for $2,000, $2,500 a month. Okay. There's a million videos on how to do that. Okay. Really good cost of living. Dating as well. I would say overall, it's not perfect. There's scams to look out for, but overall, pretty solid dating scene from what I've experienced and heard. If you're somewhat of a competent guy and you don't fall for really silly scams, you should be able to do pretty well in the dating market. So not bad. And for remote work, good. Okay. Why? Basically, all Latin America is on the Eastern time zone. That's perfect for people. Even if you work on the West Coast, it's only 3 hours. It's not that bad. You get your work done before everyone else gets up. Okay. So good for remote work. There's a lot of places like Medellin and Asuncion, Paraguay that have networks of people doing remote work, making their money online for you to connect with, in Bogota as well. So overall, it's pretty solid. I think I have to give a good one to Latin America there. Let's talk about Eastern Europe. So for Eastern Europe, cost of living, this one is more expensive. It depends on where you're at. Okay. But some places like Poland, for example, are not actually that cheap. Now you go to the more Balkan areas, it gets cheaper, but I would say overall more expensive than Latin America and Southeast Asia, but the infrastructure is better. Overall, the safety is pretty good in Eastern Europe. I didn't put safety on here, but if we had to rank them really quick safety-wise, Asia first, Eastern Europe second, Latin America clearly third on that list. So infrastructure is good. Knowledge of English is probably a little better in Eastern Europe as well. Now for dating, this depends on where you're at, but I've heard that it is pretty good and pretty solid. I don't think it's as, the market's as favorable for you as Latin America, but can be really solid as well in Eastern Europe, depending on where you're at. Remote work, I would say this is probably medium to bad, okay? Time zone is gonna be the big problem. It's not as bad as Asia, but not nearly as good as Latin America. So, those are other factors to consider. Now the score, this is something you have to do. Okay, for me, when I scored this out, this is just gonna be out of 10 for me. Asia is pretty solid, it's not bad. Latin America is the best for me based on my location and my preferences. And Eastern Europe is by far the lowest just because I'm on the West Coast and it's so far from me. It's one I've never even seriously considered. So that's a quick breakdown of how you can go about thinking, what's a good place for me to take a test trip or trial trip to, or do a trial run of living somewhere for a month. These are the factors to consider. I just went through them. Go through the test yourself, see what comes out on top. Also go with your gut and what interests you, okay? It can't just be purely broken down to numbers. It also has to do with what your conviction is, where you want to go, and what you want to try. So consider that. But I'm just saying these are the different factors to think about. Like I said, my 6-step training is in the description down below for free. You should check that out if you want some help planning your first trip or thinking about living abroad as a Christian man and all the factors to consider. It can be a bit overwhelming there. So I hope this video was helpful for you guys. Leave a comment down below. Which region are you looking to visit first? I would like to hear your thoughts. And anyways, I'll see you guys next time.